Third try, hopefully a little less wordy. Okay, welcome to the practice of artificial intelligence at SDI. The goal, in a formal way, is a biomimetic interaction technique so that the intelligence or the brains who are doing the searching and looking for parts feel like they're being heard and interacting with an intelligence on the other side of the wire. So let's start in the very middle of my Venn diagram, because artificial intelligence is not really measured in the same way as other business metrics. And so what we need to measure the success of artificially intelligent interactions with technicians is a holistic experience KPI, which is a compound metric of several different domains, so that essentially the surround sound requirement of feeling like you're interacting with an intelligence is measured and managed on each of the different levels that we expect when dealing with intelligence. So really, it's these three R's: to be remembered, to have a relevant experience, and to have a responsive experience. These are the three kind of guiding principles of an AI practice. We measure it in three ways to make clear sense. Obviously, with an increase in sales by increased engagement of intelligence. Second, by increased funnel KPI, or managing the ratio of people moving from the beginning to the final purchase, seeing an improvement in the funnel KPI. And the third is measuring voice of the customer. Well, it might seem counterintuitive. The fact is, an artificial intelligence practice needs to be measured against the responses coming from the customer, that they feel that there are intelligences on the other side of the wire. So that's really the principle. Funnel KPI, sales KPI, and voice of the customer KPI pulled together into something called a holistic experience KPI. Okay, so now let's kind of step up and go from a 50,000 square foot view about what artificial intelligence truly is today. So artificial intelligence, are we there yet? Do we have Will Smith battling an army of robots, or do we have an army of robots in Westworld looking to take over? The answer is a resound. Do we control robot personalities by a simple visual dashboard like Sandy Newton in Westworld? The answer is no. Can we build a robot that feels intelligent? Yeah. So what we're seeing is, I guess, from Lost in Space, the computer, and I guess Ex Machina, we have a robot who, while looking mechanical, actually feels intelligent. And the fact is, no, we still have a long way to go. And here's an interesting link that I threw in called Understanding and Resolving Failures in Human-Robot Interaction. A sense of where we are today versus where these things are, if you feel like nerding out. But another important question is, are humans ready for artificial intelligence? Here's a couple examples I pulled together to look at this question. One is a website for questions to never ask Alexa. On the right, you can see the sort of murdering of data science and digital marketing from having ads creepily follow people around forever from the misuse of artificially intelligent advertising. You can see people have considered shooting Amazon delivery drones. And of course, my favorite is the world traveling pitch bot that unfortunately was mangled and disassembled in my hometown, Philadelphia. And finally, a look at the MIT Technology Review, which in reality says AI still sucks at moderating hate speech. So my read is AI has a long way to go. We're nowhere near any of the risks that people in the movies and your friends and family think. When you talk about AI, it's very important to emphasize what we're doing is not the creepy first generation stuff that turns people off to the interaction that artificial intelligence is. Instead, Instead, it's a sense that you're dealing with an intelligence on the other side of the wire. So AI my way. How do I go about attacking artificial intelligence? There's this great series on Netflix called The Alchemist, which really kind of encapsulates my approach to AI. And the alchemist techniques are to use a very few number of tools, regardless of the challenge. And it requires focus, creativity, and resilience. And those are really the key to any data science or artificial intelligence practice. So this is what I would select to run an artificial or data science team at SDI. So who am I? My name is Matt Williams. I'm a groupie data nerd, and formally what I am is a knowledge worker. I got a BA in cognitive science, study of the mind from computer science, linguistics, philosophy, and psychology back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, and started my early career at LexisNexis. I worked on some agent swarms and some parallel executions and ran data warehousing, did some interesting machine learning based data matching algorithms at LexisNexis that were very successful. I ended up moving over to Wyndham Worldwide to run their Solar-like search orchestration and navigation, connecting what users were searching for to their, vacation hotels. And this is where I really started doing customer journey and behavioral analysis. So this was about 10 or 15 years ago. Really distinguishing intentions from purchase intent from planning. And then for the last 10 or so years, what I've really focused on is presenting roadmaps on data analytics and the practice of A/B testing, and really how to employ the techniques of digital marketing and content testing in service of understanding hypotheses and testing an ongoing series of really conversations about what the user wants. So it's really kind of the basis for what I'm proposing. Okay, so why the heck am I an AI expert anyway? So the reality is, if you do a search on famous psychologists, you can see Freud's on top. There's a guy named Rogers on the left. And then there's a guy on the bottom called B.F. Skinner. And when you hear his name, you can often, most people think of the sort of rat in a box, where he was trained, if he always had a certain lever, to even get food and this and that. But he was actually one of the most famous psychologists of the 20th century. And in fact, my very own dad was his protege and worked with him for years, and then became a famous psychology professor at UPenn. Net, I grew up going to his lab and seeing like cages of pigeons and cages of mice, and spent my whole childhood kind of learning about behavior and theories of mind from a pretty smart guy. And some of the things that he taught me about cognition and how minds work are things that I still feel I have to contribute as a knowledge worker. So it's kind of my professional goal was to integrate some of the conversations that he and I had about behavioral analysis and theories of mind into the practice of AI, but perhaps getting some of the prompts, getting us a little closer to some of the prompts. So everyone's wondering why I'm slowing down, because I got something from Scott. I got to make sure. Scott, I thought it was Okay, it's lower AF, bang, cap J, 2, cap Y, 4, 7, H, U, H capital. All right, just can keep going on this thing. Okay, so here we are. We're talking about three psychologists. Now, there's some important things to discuss about Freud. So Freud became famous for helping, in this case, a lady find out what's giving her sort of mental trouble. He was coming at it from the so-called top down of who we are and how we're feeling, and that the mind can be decoupled from the sort of wetware bric-a-brac operation of the brain, and just talking about sort of intangible concepts like feelings, that he could create a healthier mind. By contrast, B.F. Skinner believed in a sort of strict behaviorist approach where there is no action ascribed to the mind that cannot be modeled and influenced through behavioral training. So very important distinction between when we talk about theories of mind for Freud, we're talking about the mind. And when we're talking about theories of mind for B.F. Skinner, we're talking about behavior, which is really the basis for the behavioral analysis of web analytics today. Okay, so one more sort of deep nerd thing, and then we'll get back to a little bit of strategy. But uh, okay, good. So again, like Freud believed in looking at the mind, and Skinner believed it was working from the bottom up. So really, the theories of mind and really how the we feeling evolved from our brain involved coming at the mystery from two different directions. The top down of a Freudian, or this is another incredible book called The Society of Mind by Marvin Minsky, which essentially talks about how we crowdsource our emotions or our decisions based on a series of conflicting views from essentially a society of different desires in our mind. Contrast that with Richard Dawkins, whose incredible book, The Self-Esteem, completely transformed the way I look at the world and makes an incredible, rich argument that what drives where we live, who we choose to marry, and how we choose to conduct our lives really is at the service of the genes within us, rather than some sort of free will that, a B.F. Skinner wouldn't ascribe to us, or Richard Dawkins wouldn't. But the free will, of course, is the basis for the Freudian side of dealing with a mind. So, okay, I know this is deep stuff, and if you're a business person, just like pause it and go and pick up the slides, because we're going to. Okay, so one more thing about B.F. Skinner on mind. Here's a quote that he did. The real problem is not whether machines think, but whether men do. And that's really both the advantage and the weakness of the behaviorist model. So, here's a link to the self-esteem from the Richard Dawkins I showed on the last page. And here's a really interesting one that I found called Brain Cells in Petri Dish Learn to Play Pong. And, it's another way to show that we don't need to ascribe sort of that we sense of like mind in order to demonstrate learning. Because really, B.F. Skinner presented an incredible model for how to influence behavior, which I believe is really influential in the growth of digital marketing. So let's look at what it did and didn't do well. So behaviorism is an excellent technique for, measuring digital engagement influence, and maybe doing behavioral analysis or mapping customer journeys. But what's it bad at? It's a terrible technique for listening to our technicians, to our customers, and learning from their feedback. Hey, I searched for this last time, I have to retype it again. Or, hey, I searched for this last time, but it's like still on page 5 of my search results. And the recommendations are nothing I would ever use, So behaviorism can help us unlock, what's the right visual treatment to engage somebody, but it's not necessarily the right thing to measure for an improved search experience. So like, here's like a definition for an SDI AI. An artificial or so-called system-created intelligence will demonstrate relevance, remembrance, be predictive, use context, and be responsive to environmental conditions like mobile or desktop, purchase and search aware for this test location supplier manufacturer. So this is really the basis for a data science and for customer lifecycle management or customer lifecycle valuation process. Okay, so a little more deep nerd stuff. Like with the behavior theory of mind, which is no mind, it enables us to use systematic processes to measure and modify behavior. So on the left, what you'll see is called a decision tree. This is a behavior state decision tree, but it's essentially the way, advertising works today, where if we have one preference, they show us one type of ad, or we have a different preference, we see another ad, or if it's a certain time of day or a certain device, it can show us over. Decision trees are excellent because they're incredibly simplistic and they don't require really feedback or learning. It's essentially like a staircase. You walk down the staircase, you walk up down the staircase, and you can measure how well that's doing its job. On the right, you can see how it's been characterized in a psychological context of stimulus and response, and then reinforcement based on the interpretation of the response. So essentially, we can influence behavioral responses by using data science-based testing, observation, analysis, and adjustment to simulate an intelligent-like response for our customers. So why is AI in business such an incredibly difficult thing? Here's why I see it to be a hard mountain to climb. The first thing is, artificial intelligence faces the same problem as the mind, the mysterious middle problem, where it's unclear how our influence and behaviors of the neurons in our brains relate to the feeling of who we are and what we want from the world. So you can see the tech-driven machine learning are really systemic techniques that in some ways take the place of what our neurons in our brains do. And on the bottom, you can see really this is where the AI practice needs to focus. Intelligence-driven user experience management techniques. Simple things like A/B content testing and search improvement based on ongoing analysis and review of prior searches to find people who are searching and can't find things, to find people who always make the same misspellings and get them to where they actually want to go, to create relevant type ahead, and to pre-fill forms and show that you remember their data and who they are and what they want from last time. And then finally, creating and embedding learning and feedback systems for voice of the customer and really to understand how people are reacting to the processes that we are offering. Good. Okay, so I guess this is some deep nerdy stuff, but so what you can see on the left are the types of techniques that the artificial intelligence team can employ in order to engage intelligence of the mind rather than influence, unconscious influence. And let's see what this link is. They open like that. So this is going over the difference between bottom down and bottom up and top down processing. Okay, so this is where I'm going to move from AI to the SDI practice. I mean, essentially what you're seeing on the top is how the world operates today. So we have our 5 senses, input to a brain. The brain makes some decisions on what that means. It's a black box. In this case, we can describe no conscious mind and simply a response, just like the mouse. Stimulus response, is really the basis for influencing digital behavior and the basis for data science-based user engagement techniques. Now, the bottom is where we need to engage the customers. So, rather than saying we know there's a brain, all we can say is what we got from Descartes. I think, therefore I am. I am an intelligence, therefore I am. So this is the feeling that we want our text to have, how it feels to be known. I think I did that one to death, but so essentially, if we're doing it right, the customer feels known and remembered. And these are the measurement techniques to get there. So here's what I would want a data science team to do. Techniques that involve influence and measurement and have no scripting of a conscious mind. And then the AI team needs to focus on voice of the customer, ensuring that prior interactions are remembered and integrated into new systems, considering the search to purchase KPI path and whether it's growing, whether it's gotten better or worse over time. So essentially what we're doing in the bottom is called Bayesian interrogation, asking questions. On top, what we're doing is creating systems to test the questions we've already created. So again, the most important thing an artificial intelligence team can do is discuss what they see and ideas and hypotheses for how to improve the sense of the customer feeling known and remembered. So here's a nice map of the different algorithms and the different types of artificial intelligence that are being created today. I broke it up into segments of memory and attention, machine learning, learning theory, learning systems, robotics, and of course, semantics. So, our data science practice will be CRISP-DM-driven, team-wide, with ongoing analysis and domain learning and data-driven hypothesis testing. We're going to do predictive projects around improved search navigation, improved recommended items, and improved carrier prediction, but better than we do today for like FedEx versus UPS. And finally, we're going to create a semantic knowledge graph connecting prior relationships and prior experiences in a relational graph format so that we can manage context and topics when people are doing search and natural language processing. So, I will let you guys go through these last couple of slides on your own, but I think it's really important to note that when we're dealing with intelligence, we're dealing with engagement, and that's quite different than systemic view. So again, like an important part of an artificial intelligence practice is to manage visual perception and make sure it's highly engaging. And of course, I'm a fanboy of this particular guy called Edward Tufte. And he wrote a book called Beautiful Evidence that really changed the way I present data. It has to do with info density. So there's no negative space in this black and white. It all contains information and on breaking expectations. So I'll let you guys go through the different samples, but essentially that's it.